The Franke House of Horrors is exactly why I think family vlogging is one of the most unforgivable sins in our modern age of internet celebrities. The red flags that followed Ruby Franke's online career had been haunting our screens for years, and despite her own adult children begging for help, no one did a thing. Actually, that's not true. People were sure quick to click away live footage of what was clearly child abuse happening in real time, yet nobody did a thing. If it weren't for one small, brave little boy, these kids would have died at the hands of their own mother, and their deaths would have all been for one more click, one more like, and a handful of views from strangers online. This is the story of Ruby Franke, momfluencer to felon. Let's get into it. The Franke empire is a large one, and it doesn't start or end with Ruby. As you can probably tell from my introduction, I have absolutely no time for family vloggers at all. Any person who puts their kids online deserves jail time, in my opinion. I have never come across any family channel that I agree with. Never. Children are not here to work like livestock to make their parents rich, shoving a camera into their faces every moment of their waking days and forcing them to smile for the camera while you're putting their personal problems, their growing pains, getting disciplined for normal child missteps, their every move online. It's all an egregious violation of their privacy. No matter how chipper or wholesome the channel might seem on the outside, not one of these children are old enough to give their consent to being filmed, and none of them deserve to carry the weight of their family's financial affairs on their shoulders. With that said, let me tell you about Ruby and how the world watched as she spiraled deeper into an ever more controlling, obsessive, and deeply disturbing pattern of parenting built around her own children. This story really starts with four sisters, Ellie, Julie, Bonnie, and Ruby, a typical family in Utah who grew up under the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or as many of you might know it, Mormonism. In the early 2010s, when family vlogging really started kicking off, it was the youngest sister, Bonnie, that started a channel first. Between 2013 and 2015, Bonnie had roped all three of her sisters into the business as well. I'm not going to mince words here. The sisters and their families made bank. Serious money, parenting advice, fertility journeys, van life, and everything in between. The sisters, their husbands, and the 19 children they had between the four of them were chugging out content at an alarming rate. And you heard that right, 19 kids between the lot of them. That's because pregnancy and birthing videos statistically bring in the most views of all. These kids were produced with the sole intention of grabbing up more views. I wish I was kidding. But kids are where their money comes from, and almost every successful channel pumps out a new baby when the previous one stops being cute. And if you can't believe that it works, just look at their livelihoods. 3 trips to Disney World every year, vacations in Hawaii, and houses and cars that are worth millions. But Ruby was a little different. Sure, all of the sisters were active members of their respective churches, and the family had long since been known for blending religion and parenting together. But Ruby took it a step further. She made it her entire persona to show people how to break a child's will and pointing out how parents were creating tiny little criminals by their lax disciplinary actions. Ruby was here to show you how to be a firm, strict parent that produced the most obedient children the world had ever seen. If you did not raise your children the way she did, you were doing so in an ungodly way and setting your kids up for a life of failure and evil. Her husband, Kevin, was shoved to the side, putting her at the center of the channel, with the children playing the obedient examples of what parenting properly looked like. At first, the rules just bordered on insanity. Kids had to ask permission to speak. They had to make their own lunch boxes. Even the 6-year-old. Bedtimes and screen time were non-negotiables. Then, the punishments started getting outrageous. The crazier Ruby's rules got, the more people were chirping in the comments, the more people were subscribing, and the more money lined her selfish, despicable pocket. The oldest son, Chad, was punished for roughhousing with his brother. The punishment? His bed was taken away and he had to sleep on a beanbag for 7 months. The kids needed to ask permission to enter their own bedrooms, and if they forgot to do so, their doors were taken off. Loss of dinner privileges for the smallest transgressions. The 6-year-old forgot to pack her own lunch for school. Ruby not only refused to bring her food, she punished the little girl when she got home, calling it a natural consequence. The eldest daughter had to endure the world watching her as she shopped for bras for the first time she shaved her legs. Every aspect of her life was out for the world to see, not to mention a few clearly predatory viewers that left the most disgusting comments below their videos. Such people were expressing their concern over children being denied food as punishment. But what do words on a keyboard mean when you're pulling in 2 million subscribers and clocking in over 1 billion views on YouTube? Ruby was shocked that the Child Protective Services showed up at her house after numerous calls from viewers became too many to ignore, and she stood firm despite the public scrutiny and now even law enforcement involvement. According to Ruby, she was doing right by her kids. She wasn't physically abusing them, and their punishments were simply a consequence of their actions. In 2019, there was a serious shift in Ruby, and not one for the better. Ruby was introduced to Jodi Hildebrandt through church networks. Jodi was a licensed therapist known for her rigid principle-based living program. They were introduced because Ruby thought that she was having trouble controlling the children. Jodi decided that the younger children had spirits of evil in them, and they needed to be punished for some imagined transgression by not receiving Christmas presents. Instead, they had to watch their older siblings open their gifts and clean up the wrapping paper after they were done. The oldest Franke son, Chad, was pushing back against his mother's overbearing, outrageous rules. His rebellions, if you can even call it that, were telling his little brother that they were going to Disney World at 1 a.m. as a prank and putting another brother into a basketball hoop because the boys wanted to see if he'd fit. Typical older brother hijinks. To Ruby, this was as bad as breaking the law. After their sessions, it was decided by Jodi that Chad deserved to be sentenced to a wilderness camp for troubled teens for his crimes. Actually, the Utah troubled teen camp industry is a video I need to do in the future. These camps are worse than prison, but that's a discussion for another day. Drop me a comment if you want me to cover some of the deaths that occurred at these camps. Anyway, back to Ruby and Jodi's strange codependent relationship. Over the course of the next year, Jodi started taking over the family piece by piece. Jodi's main program was called the Connections Classroom, a course that was presented as a life coaching and therapy program rooted in principles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But over time, it evolved into something many former clients, family members, and investigators have described as cult-like. Jodi would take control over families completely by blending religious ideology with extreme parenting rhetoric. Jodi invited Ruby to join her online video guide called Moms of Truth, where they sat down to coach parents to use religion, rules, and consequences to take control of their families. Ruby disappeared off YouTube. She gave up millions of dollars for Jodi. Her sole attention was focused on Connections and Moms of Truth. Through therapy sessions with Jodi, it was decided that Ruby and Kevin needed to separate temporarily so that Ruby could take control of her family again. But in truth, Jodi needed him out of the picture because Kevin, usually the docile pushover, was starting to push back against the insanity. Now, with Kevin and Chad, the main obstacle in Jodi's path, out of the way, and the oldest daughter, Shari, off to university, Ruby and the 3 remaining children were completely under Jodi's control. What had started as an already concerning team-up exploded into a full-blown house of horrors when Kevin, Chad, and Shari left. The 3 younger children were told they were evil and needed to suffer to be purified. Purification could only come from starvation, isolation, and physical punishment. I'm going to avoid using the 3 younger kids' names. They've been blasted all over the internet their entire lives and suffered a great deal of trauma at the hands of their insane mother. They deserve at least this small amount of privacy. But there were 2 girls and 1 boy, all under the age of 12, still left under Ruby's tyranny, if you were wondering. By 2020, Jodi had convinced the house that they were all possessed by spirits of laziness and disobedience. If they couldn't work the demons out of the children with physical labor, then Jodi would have to take their demons into herself, and the family were tasked to exorcise the demons out of her. Jodi went into fits, spoke in tongues, and after the family had prayed over her incessantly, she'd be released from the devils and receive divine visions of them all riding lions in heaven. She was so tormented by the children's demons that Ruby slept in Jodi's bed to monitor her, getting up in the night to perform exorcisms and to record divine visions. I'm not even kidding. This woman had them all convinced that they were all destined for a divine mission, if only they could get rid of the demons that were trying to stop them from achieving their full potential. Not only were the children usually present during these exorcisms, they were being forced to endure more and more extreme punishments. Withholding food and making them sleep on the bare concrete was just the start of it. The girls' hair was shaved off because they dared to cry. The kids were taken to a cemetery and made to pick weeds and remove broken glass by hand all day in the summer without water or food. They were locked in closets for days and sent to clean other members of Connections' houses. By the end of these poor kids' ordeal, they were starved for days at a time, justified as fasting to purge evil spirits. Ruby repeatedly kicked her son while wearing heavy boots. She held his head underwater, only allowing him to come up for air before he passed out, and the kids were made to stand outside to be hosed off with freezing water because they'd lost the privilege of bathing. The kids were often tied up in closets with duct tape overnight and only let out in the morning to work more demons out of them. And if you're wondering where Shari, Chad, and Kevin were, well, Kevin wasn't allowed to see his wife or kids because Jodi had decreed it so. But Shari was raising hell in the background. She repeatedly filed reports with Child Protective Services, called police dozens of times, and begged family and neighbors to check on her siblings. But with no physical evidence, and no one else but Shari making any noise about this, authorities ignored her calls for 3 whole years. Shari was banned from Jodi's house after she'd confronted her mother about the state of neglect that the younger children were in. But Ruby was in too deep by this point. She'd had transcended to possession states, prophetic dreams, and divine messages that gave her more incentive ways to torture her children. This was the hell that those 3 kids had to endure for 3 whole years. I can go on and on about the extreme nature of the abuse, but you get the picture. On the 20th of August, 2023, this whole horrendous nightmare came to a head when the boy, then 12 years old, escaped the house. Ruby and Jodi had taken one of the girls to a Connections member's house to clean it, leaving him and his other sister duct taped and bound in the house. He hadn't eaten in days and hadn't been allowed any water since the morning before. Dying from starvation and dehydration was what finally drove the fear away. And I'm not exaggerating here. That poor kid stumbled over to the closest house he could find. When he reached a house where a couple were sitting on their porch, he was covered in bruises. There was still duct tape stuck to his ankles, and he was so thin that the neighbor who called 911 burst into tears over the phone when he described to the operator the state of the malnourished, obviously tortured child standing in front of him. And all that kid came over to ask was not for help or to be freed, because he'd long since lost hope that there was any escape from Jodi and Ruby. All he asked for was a glass of water. When police arrived, no one answered the door at Jodi's residence. A quick search revealed the youngest daughter, tied up in the closet and so traumatized that she was incapable of speaking for several days after being rescued. The final child was located at a Connections home, scrubbing floors. All of the children boned to the same bruises and ligaments on their wrists and ankles, indicating long-term confinement. Their wounds were doused in cayenne pepper by Jodi, and one of the girls was covered in welts. She'd been coerced into jumping into a cactus multiple times, and the infected pricks were smeared with honey and cayenne pepper too. Shari Franke had been vocal about her mother's sins, and she'd given speeches in Congress fighting for more laws to protect children from being plastered all over the internet. Chad has kept himself off the internet for the most part, citing that he's been in the public eye long enough. He's focusing on building a career in real estate while he, Shari, and Kevin work towards helping their younger siblings recover from their terrible ordeal. I'm afraid I don't have much sympathy for Kevin. He was these kids' father, a man who should have taken charge of a very obviously volatile situation. Yet he walked away with his tail between his legs. When those insane women chased him off, he's a spineless weasel, and no amount of apologies will ever make up for the hellhole he left his children in. As for Jodi and Ruby, Jodi is clearly a sociopath who gets off on torture, control, and subjugation. Many want to argue that Ruby was brainwashed by Jodi, like so many of the other victims of her cult were. The Franke family weren't the first family to be torn apart, and their kids weren't the only ones to suffer this level of abuse. But the fact of the matter is that Ruby abused her children long before Jodi came along. They were just 2 very evil women who found each other and exacted their twisted fantasies onto 3 innocent kids, because birds of a feather, sick individuals, stick together. They were charged with 4 counts of second-degree felony aggravated child abuse. Both pled guilty to all of the charges. On February 20th, 2024, they were each sentenced to 4 consecutive prison terms of 1 to 15 years per count. That means they face a maximum of 60 years, but unfortunately under Utah law, the actual time served is capped at 30 years apiece. Personally, I think this level of child abuse should be an automatic life sentence. Ruby's made a show of being remorseful, but all of her children and her now ex-husband have cut contact with her. Jodi has never shown any sign of remorse. Jailhouse phone calls revealed conversations where she blamed everything on the children and whined that she was the victim in all of this. Wonder how she's liking being locked in a closet, like she did to those children. The rest of the Connections members disbanded, and there were dozens of them. All of them had seen the children and willingly participated in their torture by allowing them to clean their houses, but none of their names have been released, nor have any of them been charged as far as I can tell. There are barely any laws in place to protect children whose parents put them online. There are a handful of states that have started making moves to put restrictions in place, but every time they do, these mega social media families just pack up and move to another state to avoid setting aside 10% of their earnings into sealed accounts for their children. Not only are these laws not being enforced fast enough, they're not coming close to putting an end to the problem. The Franke children suffered an awful fate, but they're not the only ones out there being put through this torture. Not even close. And you can bet that I'll be back here with a few more of these horror stories because the internet is full of exploited children being paraded around under the guise of wholesome family vlogging by their own parents. What cases of criminal parents do you know of that played out in the internet for all to see? Let me know in the comments below. I can promise you that if the case isn't on my docket already, I'll add it to the growing list of child abusers posing as family entertainment. There are few people I despise more than family vloggers. If these parents aren't willing to protect their own kids, then we'll have to be the ones who fight for their rights. Wouldn't you say? I worked myself into an absolute rage after looking into Jodi and Ruby's crimes, and I hope you feel the same sense of fury that I do. While I calm myself down before the next case, don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share the hell out of this video. People need to know who the monsters are that they subscribe to. See you in the next one, people. Cheers.